The rain began with a quiet whisper, the kind that could be mistaken for a gentle tap against your windows, like nature's way of saying, "Hey, I'm here." But that wasn't the kind of rain that hit today. No, this rain was different. The sky had shifted from dull gray to angry black, and in a matter of minutes, it came down in sheets, as if the heavens themselves were breaking open. The streets weren't safe, and neither were the people caught under it. Before we begin this journey, a quick request. If you believe in stories that remind us what really matters, of second chances and quiet moments that change lives, go ahead and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss the kind of stories we share. Now, let's take a step back in the rain, in the moments when nothing seems to make sense, and discover just how life can surprise you. Now, let's begin. Ben Callahan had never been one to complain about the weather. The man had lived through enough storms in his life to know that they always passed. But that night, with the rain battering his old pickup truck, everything seemed different. The windshield wipers fought to keep the glass clear, swishing back and forth in rhythm as his eyes squinted, trying to make out the road ahead. In the passenger seat beside him, his 9-year-old son Wyatt stared out the window, barely acknowledging the storm. "Dad, think we'll make it home before dinner?" Wyatt asked, his voice thick with the quiet desperation of a boy who had already missed out on too many family dinners. Ben chuckled softly, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "If this rain doesn't wash us off the road, yeah, we'll be fine, bud." But nothing in life is ever that simple. As the truck lumbered down the slick, dark country road, Ben's eyes caught something ahead. It wasn't much, just a dark figure standing at the side of the road, hunched over like a shadow against the wind. At first, he thought it was just some debris, maybe a mailbox or a pile of leaves. But then the headlights caught her face, just for a second, illuminated by a flash of lightning that lit up the world for a heartbeat. A woman, soaked, alone, standing under the heavy rain in a military uniform, carrying more than just a bag slung over her shoulder. Ben's got twisted, and without thinking, his foot slammed the brake. The truck skidded slightly, but came to a stop just a few feet away from her. Wyatt looked up, eyes wide. "She's a soldier, Dad." Ben didn't respond. His door opened with a creak, and before he even realized what he was doing, he was out in the storm, heading straight for her. "Are you okay?" Ben called out over the roar of the rain. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes sharp and defensive, but there was something in them. Something tired, something broken. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady but unconvincing. She raised her phone in a tired gesture. "I'm waiting for roadside assistance." Ben glanced at the phone, at the faint flicker of frustration on her face as she tapped the screen. He knew what that meant. No signal. Not here. Not in this part of the woods. "Come on," Ben said softly. "It's not safe out here. I've got a truck just a few steps away, and I've got my kid with me. It's not much, but I can get you to somewhere dry at least, just for a little while. Let me help." The woman hesitated. A small muscle twitched in her jaw, a silent battle of pride and exhaustion playing across her face. Then she nodded once, as if giving in to some unseen force. "Okay, just for a bit." Ben took her duffel bag and led her back to the truck. Wyatt, still staring at the woman in awe, scooted over to make room. "Wyatt," Ben said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is Tessa. She's a soldier. We're going to help her out, all right?" Wyatt nodded silently, but there was something in the way his small hands fidgeted that made Ben uneasy. He could see it. The uncertainty, the curiosity, the undercurrent of something unspoken. The drive was quiet, the truck moving steadily through the rain-soaked road. Tessa sat in the passenger seat, her eyes distant, her face unreadable. Ben glanced at her only occasionally, not wanting to intrude, not wanting to ask too many questions. He wasn't the kind of guy to dig into people's lives, especially not people like Tessa, who carried so much more than just her duffel bag. Eventually, they made it to Ben's cabin, a small cedar shingle place tucked on the edge of the woods. The kind of place you could almost forget was there if you weren't paying attention. Ben turned the truck off and sat in silence for a moment. "I'm not much," Ben said, breaking the quiet. "But it's warm, dry, and the roof holds." Tessa nodded without speaking. Her shoulders slumped, eyes lingering on the truck's dashboard. Inside the cabin, the smell of pine and firewood filled the air, the warmth from the stove cracking against the cold outside. Wyatt, ever the child, kicked off his boots and disappeared into his room without a word. Ben gestured to the bathroom and handed Tessa a towel. "You can use the bathroom to clean up. There's fresh clothes in the basket," he said, his voice kind but not probing. Tessa hesitated again, as if stepping into this strange place was too much to ask. But then she took the towel, heading for the bathroom. When she returned, dressed in one of Ben's oversized shirts and sweatpants, she looked different, softer, somehow younger, like the rain had washed away something more than just her clothes. She sat down at the kitchen table without a word, accepting the mug of coffee Ben handed her with a silent nod. The rain continued outside, drumming against the roof, filling the silence between them. Ben didn't press her. He didn't ask her story. He knew what it was like to carry pain, and sometimes you didn't need to ask to know what was behind a person's eyes. But when Tessa finally spoke, her voice was quiet, the weight of her words heavier than the rain outside. "Thank you," she said, the words rough around the edges, as if they hadn't been used in a long time. Ben didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, glancing at her with understanding. "Just kindness," he said simply. "There's a difference, you know." Tessa's lips quirked just slightly, but it was enough to make Ben feel like maybe, just maybe, this small act of kindness had begun to build something between them. The night fell quiet, the only sound the crackle of the fire in the stove. And for the first time in what felt like years, Tessa allowed herself to feel something she hadn't known she needed: peace. But peace, like everything else, was fleeting. A knock at the door, a knock that neither of them had expected. The sound echoed through the quiet cabin, the weight of it pressing on Tessa's chest. Ben stood, his face unreadable. His mind was already racing, already preparing for what the knock might bring. And when Ben opened the door, standing there was not someone he recognized, but the look in her eyes, sharp, professional, distant, was enough to make his blood run cold. "I'm Marion Doyle," the woman at the door said, her voice businesslike, but with an undertone of something that could only be described as official. "I'm here about your son, Wyatt." And that was just the beginning. The story was only beginning to unfold. But the storm had already come for them. Tessa's heart raced. The knock had shattered the quiet peace they'd so carefully built. Now, everything they had, every hope, every moment of connection, was in jeopardy. The battle for Wyatt's future had just begun, and this time, it wouldn't be just about Tessa's past. It would be about a family fighting to stay together. Will they fight for what's theirs? Or will the forces beyond their control tear it all apart? Ben's hand rested on the doorframe as he stared at Marion Doyle. The woman standing before him wore a professional demeanor, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp. But it was a faint sense of tension behind her gaze that made Ben's stomach tighten. He wasn't sure what she wanted, but something in her presence felt wrong, like the sudden weight of the air before a storm. "I'm Marion Doyle," the woman said again, her voice smooth but stern. "I'm here about your son, Wyatt." Ben's breath caught. For a split second, he didn't know what to say. His mind raced, desperately searching for meaning in her words. Wyatt, the boy he'd raised, loved, protected since the death of his wife. The boy who'd filled their home with laughter and made it feel whole again after the silence of loss. His heart thudded, and he could feel his pulse racing. "Is everything all right?" Ben asked, his voice steady but his insides in turmoil. Marion's lips curled into a polite, controlled smile. "It's a routine visit. There's been a petition filed by your wife's parents. They're requesting a formal review of Wyatt's custodial arrangement." Ben's stomach twisted into a knot, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had to hold onto the doorframe, the weight of the words sinking into him like stones. Megan's parents. They hadn't spoken to him in over 2 years. Not since the funeral. Not since Megan had passed from the cancer that ate away at her in the final months of her life. And now, out of nowhere, they want to come back into Wyatt's life. "They haven't spoken to us in years," Ben replied, his jaw tightening. "Why now?" Marion's expression didn't change. She was too professional, too measured, for any of this to be personal. They've submitted a concern regarding Wyatt's welfare. It's standard procedure to conduct an in-home assessment when a formal inquiry is raised. Ben's blood boiled. His hands clenched tighter around the doorframe, his knuckles white. Allegations of emotional neglect, lack of academic support, social isolation. Marion read from her clipboard, ticking off the accusations with cold precision. Ben didn't even bother to try to control the anger burning in his chest. Emotional neglect? His voice was low and sharp. Wyatt is thriving. He's the most emotionally attuned kid you'll ever meet. He's better off here with me than with them, and you know it. Marion raised a hand, a gesture calm. I'm not here to make assumptions, Mr. Callahan. I'm just following protocol. I'll need to speak with Wyatt, review his routine, and take notes on the home environment. Ben nodded stiffly, trying to push down the fury rising in his throat. Fine. Come in. Marion stepped past him, moving efficiently through the door, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. Ben stepped aside, his chest still tight with the weight of everything that had just been unleashed on them. Tessa stood in the hallway, just behind Wyatt, who was now hovering uncertainly, his eyes wide with confusion. It's okay, buddy, Ben said, his voice soft but firm. She's just here to ask you some questions. You don't have to say anything you don't want to. Wyatt didn't answer. He just nodded slightly, his little face tight with anxiety. Marion motioned for Wyatt to sit at the kitchen table, and the boy obeyed silently, his fingers fiddling with the edge of his shirt. Marion sat opposite him, pulling out a notepad and clicking her pen. I just want to know a little about your day, Wyatt, Marion said, her voice soft but probing. What's your routine like? Who helps you with schoolwork? What you do for fun? Wyatt shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly nervous. Tessa could see it in the way he fidgeted, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Ben sat across from him, not interfering but offering silent support. The minutes dragged by as Marion asked Wyatt question after question, some of which were too personal, too invasive for a child his age. Tessa could see the strain on Wyatt's face, the way his shoulders slumped, and she couldn't help but feel a deep protective instinct surge within her. Finally, Marion seemed satisfied with her notes. She stood up, smoothing her skirt as she prepared to leave. I'll file my preliminary report within the week, she said, her tone cold but courteous. In the meantime, I suggest you speak to a family attorney. If this becomes a custody hearing, you'll want counsel. Ben stood with her, his face grim. I will. Thank you for your time. As Marion stepped out the door, Ben remained standing, watching her leave. His chest was tight, his mind clouded with 1,000 racing thoughts. The door closed, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the echo of silence in the cabin. Dad. Wyatt's voice broke through the stillness. He looked up at Ben, his eyes wide with fear. Am I in trouble? Ben knelt down beside his son, brushing his hand through Wyatt's messy hair. No, buddy, he said softly. You're not in trouble. None of this is your fault. Tessa watched him from across the room, her heart aching for the boy who'd already lost so much. She crossed the room and stood next to Ben, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. They want to take him from you, she said quietly. Ben didn't answer at first, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if looking for an answer he couldn't find. Finally, he looked up at Tessa, his voice raw. Megan's parents never forgave me. They blamed me for pulling her off chemo. Said I gave up, but she asked me. She was tired. She wanted peace. I respected that. Tessa felt her heart twist in her chest, but she didn't speak. She just stood there, her hand on his shoulder, offering the only comfort she could. After a long moment of silence, Ben finally spoke again, his voice hoarse. I don't know what to do, Tessa. I don't know how to fight this. Tessa squeezed his shoulder. You don't have to fight alone. Ben looked up at her, his gaze meeting hers for the first time since the knock on the door. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just about the custody battle or the storm that had suddenly torn through their lives. It was about the promise of something more, something real. Ben stood up slowly, his eyes filled with determination. They can try, he said quietly, but they'll have to go through me. Tessa didn't hesitate. And through me, she added, her voice steady. Ben turned to her, his eyes searching hers, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't look like a broken man. He looked like a father who was ready to fight for everything he had, for everything he'd built. And Tessa, for the first time, felt like she was fighting beside him, but the battle was just beginning. Later that night, when Wyatt was asleep, Ben and Tessa sat on the porch, their shoulders almost touching. The night was still, the air cool and crisp as the stars flickered above them. There was a tension in the air, something unsaid between them, something that neither of them could name. But it wasn't just about the custody battle anymore. It was about everything they had found in each other, everything they had yet to discover. And then, as the softness of the night enveloped them, the sound of a car engine broke through the silence. It wasn't the engine of Ben's truck. It was something else, something unexpected. Ben's gaze shot to the road. His heart skipped a beat. Another car was pulling up the driveway, slow and deliberate. "Who is that?" Tessa asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ben stood up, his body tense. "I don't know, but I'm about to find out. What's about to happen next? Is this yet another storm to weather, or is it something far more dangerous? The answers are coming, but will Ben and Tessa be ready for what's ahead? Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter in this story of second chances, love, and the fight for family. You won't want to miss the next twist.